Dale Jr. has officially secured the DEI style number 8 font and will be using it going forward with the trademark. And Kyle Busch is among the many drivers and people that called out the lack of respect in the Xfinity series. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel and welcome back to another video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports story discusser today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them straight those really quickly. First, going to take a look at a lot of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just straighten them really quickly. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Ankram's 2025 Ulico scheme that we'll see in 2 truck races in 2025. Paint scheme's alright in my opinion. I do think the colors are okay. I like the whitish color they've got in it. I like the blue. I think it's decent. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeb Burton's 2025 Underlaw scheme that will be seen in 2 races in 2025, including at Gateway. I actually like this car. I love the red. I like the blue. I think the cars actually work really well on this one, and I think it's going to be nice to see out on the track. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Lane Rigg's 2025 BKB scheme that we'll see in around 9 or 10 Truck Series races in 2025, or 5 I should say. This actually looks good. I believe this is going to be running at Bristol this weekend as well. I like the black. I like some of the colors on this good, and I think that the sponsorship is really nice on the truck. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Caden Honeycutt's 2025 DSQ scheme that we'll see in 9 truck races in 2025. DSQ's been very closely associated with Caden Honeycutt and the Nice Motorsports team for the last couple of years. I think this actually looks okay. Looks very similar to the one he's had a couple times this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Justin Bonzionor's 2025 KBM commercial scheme that we'll see in this weekend's race at Bristol. Scheme's okay in my opinion. It's pretty cool that Justin Bonzionor is back in the Xfinity series this weekend. I think the scheme's okay. We'll see what he can do this weekend in the car. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Austin Cinder's 2025 Snap-on scheme that we'll see in select race in 2025, including, I believe, at Bristol Motor Speedway. I actually think the scheme is pretty cool. I like the white on it. I think it's actually better than the other Snap-on scheme, personally. I like they're changing it up for this time around. I think it's a decent car, and it's going to be pretty nice to see out on the racetrack later this year in a couple races in 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about William Byron. As it was reported by the NASCAR Insights account, which is run usually by Trey Ryan, it was reported that William Byron led the first 243 laps in the Cup Series race at Darlington Raceway. That is the most laps that's been led in the open portion of a race at Darlington in the history of Cup and Xfinity, and the most laps led in the history of NASCAR since when Jeff Burton led all 300 laps in New Hampshire back in 2000. William Byron had a dominant car, and they were trying to chase the record to become the first driver to have led every lap since Jeff Burton in 2000. Unfortunately, William Byron cost himself a shot and opportunity trying to go for that record, but it was really impressive seeing that car. Now, I'm not sure that car was the fastest car out on the racetrack, but I do think it's extremely impressive to see William Byron go out there and dominate the way he did and almost lead the whole entire event. Unfortunately, he cost himself a shot at a victory, but I think it's still very impressive that William Byron was able to get that done. Congratulations to him on breaking the record for the most laps led in the open portion of a race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a sour note. It unfortunately was announced earlier this evening that Shigeaki Hattori sadly passed away apparently last night. Shigeaki Hattori, for those who don't know, who owned Hattori Racing and I believe has been working as a crew member for McAnally Hillman Racing at the time. Shigeaki was 62 years old. His organization that he owned was competing in the Truck Series last year and did win a championship in 2018 with Brett Moffitt and almost had a shot to win the championship with Austin Hill in 2019. Was also a long-term competitor in the mid to late 2000s. A sad day for the sport. Sadly for Shigeaki, he was only 62 or 61 years old. Rest in peace to Shigeaki Hattori. A really sad day for the sport overall. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. Now, it was also reported by the NASCAR Insights account on Saturday that he had 5 Junior Motorsports cars that finished in the top 9 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. He had Ross Chastain who finished, I believe, in 3rd and 4th. You had Justin Allgaier who got a top 5. You had Sammy Smith who finished 9th. You had Carson Qual finished 5th. And you had, of course, Connor Zilisch who finished in 6th. This is the first time in NASCAR Xfinity Series history that Junior Motorsports or any organization in the series has ever had 5 cars finish in the top 9. That's impressive. Junior Motorsports was really, really good in this race. Ross Chastain had a fast car. Justin Allgaier dominated the race, but didn't go to victory lane because the pit crew kind of put him in a bad position, and they also had some not great pit stops overall as well. I think it's really impressive to see that Junior Motorsports continues to be as good as they are. They've been really strong in the early portion of the year. I think they're going to win a lot of races, and it's pretty impressive to see that they are able to break their own record and have 5 cars in the top 9. I think that's pretty incredible on Junior Motorsports' part. Congrats to them on having the new record of having 5 cars inside the top 9. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Japanese Grand Prix. Before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Darlington Raceway, you had the Japanese Grand Prix going on in Formula 1. And to be honest, this race was not that good. Max Verstappen, of course, won the pole and led every single lap. McLaren didn't try to play a strategy. They actually had a mistake made by Lando Norris going off of pit road. He tried to pass Max Verstappen off pit road to try to gain the advantage. They were trying to call for a penalty on Max Verstappen, which Max Verstappen did nothing wrong when you look at the incident that happened on the track. Lando tried to go for a position that really wasn't going to work, and then at this point, they were kind of keeping up with Max, but it was so difficult to pass through the dirty air, among other things that Formula 1 has, that Lando couldn't get there, and coming out the final corner, Max Verstappen leads every lap and picks up his first win of 2025. Max Verstappen dominated the race. I don't think he had the fastest car in the event, but at the end of the day, he had a dominant car, put himself in a really good position, and held off a lot of hard-charging cars to go to victory lane. A dominant win for Max. We talk about McLaren being dominant in Formula 1 this year. Well, it looks like that we're seeing that Max might be the one that can challenge. He's been solid to start the season, so I think it's a massive deal for him to go to victory lane, and I don't think this will be the last time you're going to see Max Verstappen win a race this year, because I think McLaren's going to fumble the bag at times this year, but congratulations to Max on picking up the victory. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lionel Racing. As it was reported by Adam Stern, I believe last night, that Lionel Racing has started informing wholesale customers and NASCAR Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Series teams of production increased sales. This comes off the tariffs that we're going to talk about in a little bit later in this episode. This comes at some stuff that's been reported about Lionel's future in regards to their sales, and they are going to be increasing the win diecast from about, I believe, $80 to $85 up to around $100. This due to some stuff that's been going on in regards to tariffs. Now, obviously, Lionel, they can increase the prices that they want to because they have full control, and they're basically exclusive home of die casting. Back in the day, like the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, and even the early 2010s, you had multiple die cast brands that could be produced in different areas. But because Lionel has a wholesale on the market currently at the moment, that's why you are seeing some of these situations come up. I'm not going to get fully into politics at the moment right now, but there's some other stuff that's been happening in regards to politics on where some of the stuff is being produced currently at the moment that I do think is causing some of these issues and problems. It's a really unfortunate situation for a lot of people involved. I know some people that do work over there at Lionel, I'm pretty sure, so a tough situation, all things considered, what's going on over there, and I think it's kind of sucks, all things considered. Some of the issues are going on over there right now, and basically with a lot of things happening at the moment, tough to see stuff happening, and because of the increase in the tariffs, it doesn't affect the people making the stuff, it affects the consumer. Really a frustrating situation, plus Lionel's quality hasn't been that great, unfortunately, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to change with it, but I don't know if it's going to change, because I don't think there's much going to change in regards to that, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Freedom 500. Now, earlier this evening, or a couple nights ago, you had the Freedom 500 took place at the Freedom Factory that Cletus McFarland runs pretty much every single year. You had a lot of big names that were competing in this. Of course, Cletus McFarland, Michael Waltrip, the Deegans of Brian Deegan and Haley Deegan. Gray Biffle was competing in the race. Corey LaJoie had competed in the race. I believe Kevin Smith had competed in this race as well. And of course, Travis Pastrana was in this event. In this race is, I believe, dominated a lot of time by Travis Pastrana. I think Haley Deegan and Brian Deegan did okay. I think Brian Deegan got maybe a top 5 finish. And Corey LaJoie was actually in position to pick up the win. But Corey LaJoie, who was complaining about not wanting to race in the Truck Series, was of course doing something on a Friday night. He wouldn't go to victory lane. It actually would be Travis Pastrana, who I believe was in his first ever Freedom 500 event. He would come off the corner and win his first ever Freedom 500. Congratulations to Travis Pastrana on picking up the win. Travis Pastrana has done a lot of things. He's raced in NASCAR now. He's done some off-roading. We know he's a fantastic rallycross racer. He's known for a lot of the crazy things he's done, like jumping out of planes and doing a lot of crazy stuff with Nitro Circus. To see Travis Pastrana go do something like the Freedom 500 and be somewhat successful and go to victory lane, that is a pretty cool accomplishment. And to win something where millions of people tune in, you know Cleese Farrell is one of the most popular YouTube creators out there, and he always brings a lot of great people out there. I mean, they had a great Biffle in the booth earlier today, and we know that he's got a good friendship, of course, that being Cleese with Greg. But I think it's awesome to see Travis Pastrana go and win. He did seem like a lot of people are very happy being there at the event, and I think it's just so incredible to see all the success that we continue to see from this event as a whole. Congratulations, Travis Pastrana, on picking up the win. A well-deserved win, and it's good to see this team win. I mean, it's awesome to see when you have someone that you look up to as someone who's been so successful in motorsports as a whole and everything they've accomplished. Congrats to Travis Pastrana on winning his first ever Freedom 500. Good to see him get it done. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson situation from Darlington. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Cup Series race at Darlington Raceway, let's go back to the end of this race. So at this point, you have Ryan Blaney and Tyler Reddick who are first and second position. Bubba Wallace, meanwhile, is about 21st or 22nd in this race. He had been struggling in the second half of the race after being up front and contending for the lead early in the event. Well, he, of course, had Tyler Reddick, who was getting chased down by Ryan Blaney, and Ryan Blaney was able to pass Tyler Reddick with around 4 or 5 laps to go. But as Ryan Blaney was making the pass on Tyler Reddick would get in the outside wall really hard, just overshot the corner. Meanwhile, you had Kyle Larson, who was back on the racetrack after crashing on lap 5 of the race. Kyle Larson would check up, and Bubba Wallace would run into the back of him, not seeing that Tyler Reddick had checked up. This would spin Kyle Larson into the inside wall, and that would bring out the caution. Everyone would come down pit road. Denny Hamlin won the race off pit road with Byron coming out second, and Ryan Blaney would come out in 4th position. And after the race had concluded, he had a lot of conspiracy theories going around that because Tyler Reddick had lost the lead and Ryan Blaney had passed him, maybe people thought that Kyle Larson, that Bubba Wallace, intentionally ran in the back of Kyle Larson to try to benefit his teammate Tyler Reddick. When I saw that, I was definitely really, really frustrated. Look, I know there's a lot of people who do not like Bubba Wallace, and I get that sometimes teammates are going to help their teammates, right? But when you look at the S&T data that did come out here, there is no way in any way, shape, or form that Bubba Wallace intentionally wrecked Kyle Larson, and here is why. Kyle Larson checked up going into turn number 1, and he basically went on the brakes because he thought that Tyler Reddick was going to come back down the racetrack and cause an incident, and Kyle Larson did not want that to happen. And I think that because, again, Bubba Wallace had nowhere to go in that situation. To me, it's just a racing accident. And I get that there's some people that don't like Bubba Wallace. Some things that Bubba Wallace has done in the past hasn't been great. But Bubba Wallace is not going to do things that are going to affect an outcome of the race like that, especially when it's going to screw not only his best friend off the racetrack, but it's going to hurt his teammate potentially as well and potentially give the win to somebody else because inevitably it cost Ryan Blaney the win, yes, but it also cost his teammate the victory because Denny Hamlin got the lead off of pit road. Bubba Wallace is not going to do something like that. And I know that he wanted to apologize to Ryan Blaney after the race had concluded, but really Bubba Wallace did nothing wrong. What is Bubba Wallace supposed to do? If he goes to the right, he might crash his own car and take himself out of maybe getting a top 25. To me, I just think the people were really frustrated with them because of Blaney's loss. And I get that people are upset that Blaney hasn't won a race this year, but Bubba Wallace did not intentionally try to bring out a caution to screw over him. I refuse to believe that at this point. And the fact that there are people who genuinely believe that Bubba tried to intentionally bring out the caution to screw him over is completely stupid, and I think it's complete nonsense by some of the fans, which isn't shocking and surprising because some fans will bring up some of this stuff, and I think it's kind of frustrating to see that people are really mad about them, mad at Bubba for this because it really wasn't Bubba Wallace's fault. And I don't think that Bubba Wallace really did anything wrong in this situation. It was not intentional. It was not a bad move. It wasn't really a bad move on Bubba's part because I don't think it was intentional. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Anthony Alfredo versus Lionel Honeyman Jr. Now, we've got a couple incidents we're going to talk about from the Xfinity race. Let's go back to the end of the race. So near the end of the race, you had Anthony Alfredo and Lionel Honeyman, who both had really nice looking throwbacks. You had Lionel Honeyman, who was in the Jeff Green throwback with the Nesquik car, and Anthony Alfredo, who was in the number 42 Sterling Marlin throwback and Jay McMurray throwback as well. Going into turn number 1, you had Harrison Burton, who was on old tires. Lionel Honeyman, it looked like, got up behind Harrison Burton and didn't realize that Harrison Burton was on old tires. He would come up the racetrack and trigger a pretty big wreck that would take out Kyle Segan, the Ricky Rudd throwback. I believe Josh Williams and the Mark Martin throwback got collected in the crash as well. And of course, Anthony Alfredo was collected in the crash as well. And after the race had concluded, Anthony Alfredo was upset and was not very happy about what had happened on the track. And he says that basically called out Lionel Honeyman Jr. by basically saying that there are 0 qualifications to be in the Xfinity Series and there are some people that should not be qualified. And then he went on to say that he passes Allright and got by him and didn't basically pass his Allright and that his Allright got past him and all that stuff. Seeing that from Anthony, and then you had Lionel Honeyman also responded by saying that I get why Anthony's upset, but it really wasn't all entirely my fault. When I look at the incident in situation, I think that Lionel was a little bit more at fault there, but it wasn't like Lionel Honeyman did it intentionally. And I think that while Anthony Alfredo has a right to be frustrated and upset by getting taken out in a crash, I don't think that Lionel had any sort of intention to do something like that. And the fact that Anthony Alfredo is trying to call out Lionel Honeyman, who is in the same shop, by the way, with the ECR engines, and if I'm not mistaken, both these cars are from the same shop, I'm pretty sure, from the ECR side of things. I don't really understand why he's trying to say that Leyland has 0 qualifications to be in this series. Lionel Honeyman with Young's Motorsports equipment last year did get a top 5 or 2 top 5s last year, and he also did finish in the top 5 in the ARCA East Championship in 2022. The guy is not a bad race car driver, and we got to remember, he is only 20 years old. This is a tough track for young drivers who don't have as much experience in the sport compared to guys like Anthony, who do have a lot of experience. And I've seen Anthony Alfredo do some things that are also very questionable in his career as well. So while I do understand Anthony's frustration, I do understand that he would be upset about what happened on the racetrack. I don't think he needed to be that blunt, to be honest. I think that was a little bit unnecessary, a little bit uncalled for by Anthony there. And again, I don't understand why he just wanted to be like that. Again, I understand being upset that he got taken out of contention. More power to you to be upset about something like that. But at the same token, same time, I don't think Leyland had any intentions to miss the corner there. He didn't realize that Harrison was on old tires, which Harrison had a good run going as it is. To me, I do understand some of the frustration. I get it. It's understandable. But at the same token, same time, I think it's a little bit overbearing to see Anthony get that upset about a wreck that wasn't intentional, in my honest opinion. I think it was a little bit overkill to see that. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Toyota and the GR Supra. There have been some questions in regards to the future of the Toyota and what they are going to do with the GR Supra. Now, John Newby, who I believe used to work for NBC Sports a couple years ago, I think he's working for Alt Driver, I believe that's the company he's working for currently at the moment, did follow up with a bunch of people from Toyota very recently. And it sounds like that Toyota will be using the GR Supra for the foreseeable future and will use it past 2026. The reason this is being asked is because 2026 is going to be the final year of production for the GR Supra. And it doesn't sound like right now there's any plan to make another Supra for 2027 and beyond. So they're going to be using this body style going forward. Now, the big thing is this is not the first manufacturer that is doing something like this. You take a look at Chevy. Chevrolet, of course, is using the Camaro body right now at this moment, and they no longer have Camaro on the back of their cars or the front of it. Instead, you now just have Chevy because the Camaro went out of production in 2024. Now, I would say the GR Supra will still be in production for 2026, but past 2026, there's no plans to make another Supra at the moment, unless, of course, they do want to go to the Toyota Camry around 2028 or 2029, which is certainly possible. But I think that you're going to start seeing like something like this going forward, where you are going to see some of these companies just start using the bodies they've had for a long time. So I think it's going to be more of a marketing campaign going forward. No, Breakart mentioned this in his video, I believe, on Friday, but he mentioned it. I think a lot of these Toyotas and a lot of these companies are going to be using stuff like this, where they're just going to be going for marketing instead of trying to sell a product. They're going to be using it for marketing to get people to buy a lot of different products. Chevrolet talked about that, I believe, earlier this year. And I think it is definitely certainly something very interesting for sure. To me, when I think about this, I think it's something we're going to have to keep our eyes out on because we don't know what the future of Dodge. We know Dodge is rumored to be going up to Xfinity potentially as early as 2027. We've heard rumors about Honda coming into Xfinity and Cup and trucks down the road as well. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens on that front as well. We'll just see what goes down, and we'll be paying attention to that as time progresses, goes on. I think it's interesting, though, they're not making any changes to the Toyota GR Supra going forward, and I think that it's going to be something to pay attention to in the near future, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about tariffs. As there was a report by Adam Stern on Friday evening that Steve Phelps says that NASCAR is keeping tabs on the recent announced tariffs that have been going on over the course of the last couple of weeks. It was also reported as well not too long ago by Adam Stern as well that multiple car companies like I believe Toyota, Chevrolet, and Ford, and GM, and Stellantis have all been trying to convince the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to back off on the tariffs that are going on because they feel like it is going to affect a lot of these big companies, and a lot of the production is going to be something that could hurt a lot of these automaker companies in a really massive and major way. And these tariffs affect a lot of things currently at the moment right now. This does also include NASCAR because some of the parts that are used for the next-gen cars are currently based outside the United States and based, I believe, in some of these countries that are being affected by the tariffs currently at the moment. That do affect countries like Mexico. I think the UK might be affected by this as well. China, we know, is affected by this currently at the moment in regards to the tariffs. And I think it's something that we're going to have to pay attention to because it could have a big effect on the next-gen car. I would definitely love to see that the team owners would be able to get back and have control of making these cars going forward. I think that would really help with the racing. I think we all know that the next-gen car doesn't always put on the best racing. I do think that, unfortunately, it's something that we're going to have to pay attention to because we know there's been rumors about the Mexico race not happening. Obviously, it sounds like that's still in the works for 2025. I don't think anything's changed because we're only 2 months from the race 2 months from that race happening at this time. So it's, again, these tariffs are definitely going to be something that we're going to be paying attention to. So I think there's some big effects that this could definitely have on as we do get closer to the start of the next year, because I think it's not something that's going to affect immediately, but as we do get farther down into the year, I think it's something that we'll have to keep our eyes out on for sure. So I do think that Steve Phelps paying attention to something like this is definitely very, very important, and it could affect a lot of different industries in NASCAR going forward. So again, we're going to be keeping an eye on the story as time progresses and goes on. I think it's something that, again, we're going to be watching. We'll be waiting to see what happens, and we'll see if the tariffs do affect NASCAR in a pretty big way. It really won't affect the Xfinity series right now because Xfinity, they still build all their stuff right now. But I do think it could affect the NASCAR Cup Series going forward, especially with the next-gen car still being around only in its 4th year and about 10th year it's been in production at this point. But I do think it's something to watch out for as time progresses and goes on in regards to the tariffs. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Christopher Bell, Ross Chastain, and Chase Elliott. Now, of course, these were the 3 guys in the Cup Series that were competing in the Xfinity Series race on Saturday. And all 3 of these drivers had a little bit of controversy and got into it during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Darlington Raceway. So throughout most of the race, Justin Allgaier had dominated the event. But these 3 drivers were having solid runs. Now going to the late portion of the race, there was a restart that happened with around 30 laps to go in the event. And he had Ross Chastain, who had a really fast car throughout the day. He was being very, very aggressive. And diving down the front straightaway, Ross Chastain made a big move on Chase Elliott and was able to pass him, and it seemed like there might have been a little bit of contact on the racetrack. After that incident happened, a caution came out very quickly in the race. Chase Elliott seemed to not be very happy with Ross Chastain about the incident that happened here, and he bumped him under caution not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now, obviously, Chase Elliott and Ross Chastain do have a little bit of history from earlier this year. You go all the way back to Circuit of the Americas. Ross Chastain had made a really big move going into turn number 1 on the 3rd race of the season and just completely missed the corner and ran into Chase Elliott and caused a big chain reaction that hurt his teammate, hurt Denny Hamlin, who has had now multiple wins this season, and other drivers in the field as well. And, of course, we all thought that Chase was going to wreck Ross during the COTA race. He definitely didn't, and Ross did lose a ton of positions in spots. Now, obviously, Ross wasn't really understanding why Chase Elliott was mad about that situation. But then you get to the other situation with Christopher Bell. So going down in turn number 1 on the next restart, Ross Chastain was on the inside of Christopher Bell. He obviously had a faster car than Bell at that point, and would literally force Christopher Bell up in the outside wall. It just wasn't clear going into turn number 1, and that would get Christopher Bell really hard hard in the outside wall and would get a ton of damage. And this would be one of the reasons that Christopher Bell dropped from being in the top 5 instead of dropping all the way back to the middle of the pack and finishing 25th or 26th. And Christopher Bell was not very happy about the situation and said if this was during the NASCAR Cup Series race, this would be made more of a bigger deal. Ross Chastain actually did respond and say, yeah, I didn't leave enough room. That's my bad. That is my fault. It seemed like the old Ross Chastain was back in this race. And even Ross is talking about the fact that he had Hendrick engines for the first time, kind of calling out the ECR engine department. We know that Trackhouse does get their stuff from ECR, which we know the ECR engines are not as strong as Hendrick. I thought they were all kind of working together, Hendrick and ECR, the same thing, but I guess they're still not doing that at the moment right now. To me, when I think of the Chase Elliott and Bell and Chastain incident, I think it's certainly interesting. The only 3 Cup Series drivers that were involved in the race were getting into a little bit of beef and a little bit of carnage on the track. To me, at least, Chastain and Elliott got good finishes at the end of the day. And I feel bad for Bell because Bell had a car capable of winning the race. I do think that Chastain was a little bit over-aggressive, but when you give him a good enough car, he can kind of go back to his old ways. Y'all remember Ross Chastain from 2022 and 2023, and then you've had a lot of people recently who try to blame Ross, like Joey Logano, for example, last week at Martinsville. To me, in that situation, I really don't think that Chastain did anything wrong at Martinsville. I think that Joey was just looking for an excuse and not get mad at Briscoe, which I don't really understand that. I think in this case, though, Chastain was at fault for the Bell incident, but at least in this case, Chastain accepted responsibility and took blame for it. So he definitely was at fault. There's no denying that and no question about that, and I think he definitely was a little bit over-aggressive in regards to that. Just a little too over-aggressive from Ross, but sometimes Ross can be like that, and it's not the most shocking thing to see that Ross was a little more aggressive in that situation. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the 2311 Front Row Motorsports and NASCAR lawsuit. As last night or a couple of nights ago on Friday, there was a pretty big update in regards to the lawsuit going on between 2311 and Front Row Motorsports and NASCAR. It was reported by Bob Pockers on Friday evening that NASCAR has officially filed a response to their basically appeal in regards to the lawsuit and the appeal board they're going for currently at the moment. NASCAR identified critical errors, they say, among district courts in the market definition. And they're saying that there were a lot of critical errors in regards to the decision to give out the preliminary injunction. Now, obviously, this comes off from the appeal that they are trying to file at the moment. And that appeal here, and we'll talk about when that is going to be happening in just a short little bit. But they filed the appeal in regards to the preliminary injunction. At the end of last year, there was a change in judges from Judge Frank Whitney over to Judge Kenneth Bell at the end of last year, where the judge did not even have a trial for this. They basically granted the preliminary injunction without a hearing. This would give the charters from Supra Racing over to 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports so they could compete as charter teams. Why do those teams want those charters? Well, obviously they need them for all the drivers to compete on the team. Had the charters in the preliminary injunction had not been granted to 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports, none of the drivers would have been chartered, and every single driver at the teams, Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, and Riley Herbst, and Zane Smith, Todd Gillen, and Noah Gragson would all been looking for jobs for 2025. It would have been all not in a car currently at the moment. It would have had to find a ride for 2025, which have opened silly season up in a massive and pretty big way. And some drivers who have been signed for 2025 would have had to go look for something else for the 2025 season. NASCAR is basically appealing it, and when you look at their appeal, it just doesn't look good from their end. A lot of things they're appealing don't make sense. They even use multiple things. They use multiple places like Sportkita, I'm pretty sure, and they also use an account that a lot of people have been very, very critical of. You think about some of those big companies that are extremely clickbait on social media that have gotten a lot of clicks. They use something from that to try to use it in their thing, and it really doesn't look good in their favor. Now, in regards to the hearing is scheduled for May 9th in regards to preliminary injunction, which Judge Kenneth Bell is going to hear. My prediction is that they're not going to win this appeal and that we're still going to see 2311 and Front Row be granted it. They have a few weeks to make a decision on that. Again, that hearing is a month from now, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. Yeah, Michael Jordan actually was at the race earlier today. I know that multiple people have said that Michael Jordan wasn't going to be showing up to many races going forward because the lawsuits happened because he has not been very happy with what NASCAR has been doing, which I can't really blame him for. But I think that this is certainly going to be something that we're going to be paying attention to because this lawsuit is something that's going to be going on. We've got multiple lawsuits happening. Of course, you've got the new Legacy and Rico Racing lawsuit that got announced on April Fool's, excuse me. And you have a lot of stuff that's been happening, and now we got a situation with trademarks that came up very recently, which it seems like that's been kind of taken care of recently too. So we'll keep an eye on this lawsuit that's been happening at the moment right now, but I do think it's something to definitely pay attention to, because I think this lawsuit could have major changes and a major impact on what happens with the industry and what happens in regards to things going forward. So I do think this lawsuit is going to have a massive impact going forward, in my opinion. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Sammy Smith. Now, Sammy Smith, of course, has been in the news over the last week because of what happened at Martinsville during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. He had intentionally wrecked Taylor Gray and caused a big pileup going down the front straightaway. This would cause a big wreck, and then he got handed with a pretty big penalty. He was handed, I believe, a 50-point penalty and a $25,000 fine for intentionally wrecking Taylor Gray. And Sammy Smith, for the first time, has spoken to the media. He had apparently spoken to Dale Jr. about what had happened, but Sammy Smith spoke to the media on Saturday about what had happened, and he basically kind of feels remorseful for what happened, and he actually did speak to Taylor Gray about what had happened on the racetrack, and he also says he's spoken on what happened at the track, and he says that he is going to be a lot more better about making his moves going forward and not making the same mistakes there. But he also said he's starting to move on from what happened at Martinsville. He said that after the Xfinity Series race had concluded at Darlington Raceway, which he put together a really solid performance and did finish inside the top 10 in the race and put together a solid run there. For what happened at Martinsville, what Sammy Smith there was unacceptable, but that was not the only driver who made a lot of mistakes. And we'll get to that in just a little bit in regards to respect in the Xfinity Series very soon. But for Sammy Smith, I think the goal going forward is, number one, don't make any more enemies and just try to gain that reputation back. Because again, what he did on the racetrack on last Saturday at Martinsville was just not, it was inexcusable. It was about as bad as what Austin Dillon did at Richmond in 2024, when Austin Dillon just plowed through the corner and intentionally ran into Joey Logano and spun him really hard into the outside wall, and then he right-reared Denny Hamlin down the straightaway. It was a very similar penalty, what of course Austin Cindric got, I believe, from Coda, except the fact that Cindric did it and didn't affect the outcome for the winner. This time the winner had been affected, and I think that that was a good penalty for Sammy Smith. I know some disagree with the penalty. Some are calling for a suspension, which I do think a suspension probably should have been worthy in that situation. So Sammy Smith got very lucky to not be suspended. For Sammy Smith, I want to see the young man succeed, and I want to see him do very, very good. And I think the most important thing going forward is that just take your battles very wisely and don't just send it in a corner and then don't act like an idiot on the mic. Be a little more mature about it. You're a 20-year-old driver. You need to show a little bit more maturity if you're going to be in the sport. So I think that a lot of drivers in Cup, and we've had some drivers that said it this week, that lost a lot of respect for you on the racetrack because you drove the way you did, Sammy. So going forward, just show a little bit more respect and show a little bit more maturity on the track. Because if you can do that, that's going to earn respect not just from me, but I think a lot of the fan base as well. I think a lot of fans are not going to gain the trust of you going forward, but I think if you can try to race with as much respect as you can, which we saw him actually doing that at Darlington. He gave way, he backed off from making a move that wasn't going to work, and I think that he did a really good job. He's battling guys like Sheldon Creed throughout the day, and even Connor Zilic as well as teammate, and did a solid job not making mistakes. Again, for Sammy Smith, I'm glad to see he feels remorseful about what happened, because again, what happened there a couple weeks ago was just inexcusable and unacceptable, and stuff like that cannot happen on the racetrack going forward. Otherwise, he may not have a seat in Junior Motorsports. It's going to take time for him to grow, and he's really never going to have a Cup opportunity unless he cleans this up. I know it's going to take some time for him to gain that reputation back, but at the end of the day, I think he's hopefully learned from his mistakes and can focus on trying to win races and get another win at Junior Motorsports. He's gotten a couple wins. He's shown decent speed this year. Just do good, because you've been getting outperformed by your teammates at Connor Zilic and Carson Qual for rookies, but not by much. Just do better and don't make any stupid mistakes on the track and cause a lot of incidents and wrecks, because I think what we saw on last Saturday was just not acceptable, and it was inexcusable in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Throwback Weekend. Now, there has been a lot of discourse on social media and from a lot of people in the industry over this week in regards to what Throwback Weekend could look like going forward. And there's been a lot of discourse in regards, should Throwback Weekend continue, and has Throwback Weekend run its course? And some drivers in the industry actually said that Throwback Weekend has run its course. Chase Elliott was the biggest opponent against Throwback Weekend. He says that Throwback Weekend has run its course, and he says that eventually we are going to be using schemes that I ran in 2018. He feels like it's done way too much. We've done way too many throwbacks. We've seen the same throwbacks over and over again, and I think he thinks that we should stop doing it because of that. And this is also coming from the same guy, by the way, who had one of the worst throwbacks in the history. It's up there with the Ricky Stenhouse Jr. tie throwback they tried to do for Ricky Craven, which was not a throwback in 2021, which I think wrecked a few laps in, which was completely justified, because this is coming from the same guy who got a lot of backlash for one of the worst throwbacks that was ever ran. Bubba Wallace and William Byron kind of agreed. Bubba Wallace said that he thinks it's run its course, maybe changing it up and doing, I think it was him who said it was every couple of years we should change it up, but doing the same schemes over and over again. And William Byron said a more interesting approach. He thinks it's kind of run its course a little bit, but instead of doing it every year, maybe doing it every couple of years, which I kind of understand William Byron's take a little bit more, but I still don't entirely agree with William Byron. But Kyle Busch also had a pretty good approach to this as well, where he was on the other side of it. He actually defends Throwback Weekend by basically saying that Throwback Weekend is not for the drivers. It's not just a cool thing for the drivers. It's for the fans who have supported this sport for a very, very long time and want to look back at history. Brad Keselowski also responded to it as well by saying that I had kind of a nuanced take on it, and then I saw the people at the merch hall that had all the throwback gear and all the throwback merch. It's for the fans who support it for a very, very long time. He says, I do understand that the sponsors may not want to get involved in doing this kind of stuff, but he says that Throwback Weekend is for the fans. And Joe Logano also agreed with Brad Keselowski and Kyle Busch as well. He says it's to honor the pioneers of the sport who carried the sport away. He says that when a lot of times in NASCAR, when drivers do retire from the sport, they don't really leave a big impact and they just walk off to the sunset. He says that Throwback Weekend is a way to honor those legends of the sport. I have to agree on more of the side of Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, and Joe Logano than I have to agree with the side of Chase Elliott, Bubba Wallace, and William Byron. And what's really funny to me is, like I said, Chase Elliott had the worst throwback we have seen in a very long time. His throwback wasn't even a throwback. And it's funny to me that Chase Elliott always kind of seems to have a negative approach to things like this. Throwback Weekend is really important for the sport. I think that it's very important for younger fans who've come in recent years to learn about the history of the sport. It's not just about the cool liveries. Who really cares about the liveries on the track? Throwback Weekend is very important for the history of the sport. It's not about showing just a cool livery on the racetrack. It's about showing the iconic moments of the sport. And honestly, who cares if someone has ran the same paint scheme of like Harry Gant, for crying out loud? But we saw some really cool throwbacks, especially in the Xfinity series. And I got to give praise to the teams who actually did throwbacks this year. Hendrick Motorsports outside of Chase Elliott, I think Byron's throwback was fantastic to Jeff Gordon's 2015 car. We haven't seen that one before. We finally saw Terry Labonte's Kellogg's car from 2003, and Kyle Larson even respected it. We saw Cale Yarborough throwback. We even saw Kyle Busch throwback this year from 2016, which we haven't seen a Kyle Busch throwback, by the way. Throwback Weekend is so important for the history of the sport. Think about the one that they did this year, the Jim Clark throwback the Wood brothers did. That car crashed, unfortunately. We saw that. To me, Throwback Weekend is so important to NASCAR, and I get that some drivers don't want to participate. And if you don't want to participate, that's fine. You don't have to participate. But don't diss the event itself in Throwback Weekend just because of the fact that your sponsor didn't want to do it. Unfortunate sponsors play a major part in stuff like this, and they're the ones that really hurt stuff like this happening. And I guess sponsors want their stuff on the cars, more power to them. But at the same time, I think Throwback Weekend is so important to the history of the sport that I think there needs to be a lot more people that need to respect the history of the sport, including some of the younger drivers like Carson Ospar, who kind of made a really bad diss toward the weekend too. He probably should have shown a little more respect to Throwback Weekend, to be honest. Now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about the Xfinity Series once again and the lack of respect in this series. So over the weekend on Saturday, as expected, there was the Xfinity Series driver meeting that took place before all the cars would get on the racetrack, and it was very early in the morning. And multiple people that were part of that meeting actually came out and spoke about what was said in the meeting on Saturday. The first one was Austin Hill. Austin was speaking to the media over the week and basically kind of talked about exactly what happened during the meeting. And he actually was one of the main people that spoke out early because, of course, he's one of the veteran drivers of the sport. And he basically talked about what happened in the meeting. Same thing Justin Allgaier would say as well. And Austin Hill basically said that I do want to be one of the veteran leaders of the sport, me being in this series for a very, very long time. And I want to be one of the drivers that could talk about a lot of respect on the track. Now, Dale Jr. had a very funny comment. I think it was earlier today or yesterday. He basically kind of laughed at what NASCAR Kazan put out, saying Austin Hill trying to be the leader was one of the funniest things I had heard, because we all know that Austin Hill was one of the biggest opponents of what had happened in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Martinsville. He had caused multiple incidents on track. He had caused that big chain wreck that had happened in turn number 1. He actually took responsibility and said that in the media center. And I think that some of the ownership of that, and I think he took some accountability for what happened, but was one of the main guys that was behind what happened in the Xfinity Series race at Martinsville. And apparently it sounds like, from what people had said, it sounds like that the meeting was very, very firm, and it sounded like they were being very, very strict about what happened. Justin Allgaier said the same thing as well during it. But they weren't the only ones that kind of spoke about the lack of respect that's been going on in the Xfinity Series. Justin Allgaier does want to be one of the guys that can be one of the veteran leaders as well, which I think Allgaier should be the face of the leadership, because he's been in this series for a lot longer than most people been, and I think he should be one of the most important people out there. But there were a lot of people in NASCAR that talked about what happened on Saturday. And one of the main proponents was Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch was one of the many people that criticized the lack of respect in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He basically said that a lot of these drivers race way over aggressive, and he also says that they are not a clown show and they need to be racing with a lot more respect on the racetrack. And I 100% agree with Kyle Busch here. Kyle Busch is 100% on point. The one thing about what happened in Martinsville last week was just not acceptable. It was one of the worst races we have seen in NASCAR history, period, and one of the darkest days in the history of the sport. There's not a clown show. These guys are trying to show and trying to be professionals. And a lot of these drivers that were in this race lost some of their stock in potentially getting Cup Series rides, because Cup Series owners are looked at what happened at the race and they're thinking, what the hell are we doing, guys? You guys are racing unprofessionally and racing like clowns. The lack of respect in this series is inexcusable, and that is 100% correct. Another driver who spoke about what happened was Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace is asked about what happened there. He actually says that he lost a ton of respect for Sammy Smith by what he said after the race had concluded, where Sammy Smith said he had done what he had to do to win. And Bubba lost a lot of respect for that, because he felt like Sammy Smith did not have to do what he had to do to win that race, and he said that that was inexcusable on Sammy Smith's part. But he also says that there is a lack of leadership in the NASCAR Xfinity Series currently at the moment, because there's not a lot of veterans in the Xfinity Series right now. And Bubba Wallace is 100% correct about that. The Xfinity Series right now does not have a lot of veteran leadership in the series. You have guys like Justin Allgaier and Austin Hill. But think about this. There are 6 rookies in the Xfinity Series this year that are under the age of 25 years old. You have guys like Carson Quaffle, 20 years old, will turn 21. Connor Zilisch, 18, will turn 19. You have, of course, other people. Taylor Gray, turned 20 very recently. You got others like William Sawash, who just turned 18 in October. You have Christian Atkins, who's a little bit older, around 24, 25 years old, one of the older rookies. And then you have other guys like Chris Wright, around 30 or 31, but he wrecks a lot of equipment. There's not a lot of older veterans in the sport. Back in the days of the 80s and the 90s, you had people like Mark Martin and Tommy Ellis and Jack Ingram and Sam Art, and even people like Randy LaJoie, who raced with a lot of respect. Jeff Green, too, who raced a lot of respect on the racetrack, and would set these guys in their place. That's why I think the series had a lot more respect back in the day, and I think that's something that the series really desperately needs to get back. Chase Elliott also spoke about it as well, and I 100% agree with Chase on this too, where he basically said this series, really, that race was inexcusable and that was terrible, and he said it was one of the worst races, and wishes a series race like what happened at Coda when he had the great battle between Bell, Byron, and Reddick. 100% agree with that. I like to see more clean races like that, where drivers are not running straight into each other. But earlier today, Ron Hornaday Jr. was one of the other people that was very outspoken about what happened in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. He talked about how his grandson had basically told him to get into the simulator and said, no, I don't want to do any more racing. I'm over 60 years old, almost 70 at this point. And his grandson said, well, you don't have to basically get in. You're not going to get hurt in here. And you could just press a button and get your car reset. Ron Hornaday Jr. even said it on the broadcast as well earlier today. He said that these guys don't have any sort of respect because they're not the ones working on the cars and working on the equipment. And that's been something that's been a lost art. He is 100% correct. The series has lost the art of working on equipment. You have a lot of younger drivers in the sport that don't have any sort of respect for the equipment they're in and are in it because they have massive paychecks coming in. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some of these teams do need the money for the paychecks, among other things. The problem is that when you're racing like an idiot on the racetrack, you can kind of get away with stuff, which is something that shouldn't be happening. The series needs to clean this up going forward. I'm glad they had a meeting about this race. They needed to have this meeting because the lack of respect in the Xfinity Series right now was just inexcusable. And I think at least for the most part at Darlington, the drivers cleaned it up. But we are going to Bristol this week, so we're just going to have to wait and see if some payback happens. I hope at Bristol drivers learn, race the racetrack, use your heads. You guys need to learn how to have racecraft. The problem is, and Mike Skinner explained on the broadcast too, there's no racecraft in the series. These guys need to learn racecraft and get better at that. The older drivers, they have better racecraft than the Xfinity guys, and that's why guys like Justin Allgaier have dominated this year and have been faster. Justin Allgaier's been the best guy all season because he races with a lot of respect, and he's got really good racecraft as well. I really hope the series changes soon. I know the Controversies is getting better at that too, by the way, but I think the series needs to do better in regards to racecraft going forward, and I hope the series cleans up and gets better with respect in the future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about the number 8 trademark. Now, we've talked about this on the channel over the course of the last couple days, and we actually had a pretty big update in regards to this on Friday that we did a video on a couple hours after we did the original video on this. As Dale Jr. actually made a response to the situation happening in regards to the number 8 trademark. And Dale Jr. has officially confirmed that Junior Motorsports will use the DEI style number 8 going forward, and they will no longer be using the Junior Motorsports number 8 font they've been using since 2019 and will be abandoning the Junior Motorsports number 8 font. Now, what's going on here? Well, obviously, if you've been paying attention over the course of the last couple of days, originally was reported, I believe, from Jonathan Howard from On3 Sports that Lamar Jackson was basically trying to file an infringement on his trademark with the Era 8 brand against Junior Motorsports number 8. A lot of people like myself originally had thought that he was going after the DEI style number 8 font, which would have made no sense. It turns out that was not the case. Lamar Jackson was going after the other font. And he was going after that because he thought that it was very similar to his. When you actually go to his website and you look at the fonts they use, there's not one simple font that he's using for it. It's not even the same thing. Even the Junior Motorsports one is not completely close. And I know that this stuff is something that gets talked about quite a bit, but I don't really know what Lamar Jackson's thinking here. He's been in some stuff, of course, recently with Troy Aikman, which, again, it goes after the 8. And you look at the stuff between Troy Aikman and Lamar Jackson, you can kind of make a little bit of argument because they're both in the NFL. But it's different motorsports in different branding. I mean, motorsports in NFL are so much different. And I don't think Lamar Jackson really understands that. I think he's wanting full control, honestly, of the number 8, and I just don't think that that's going to work for Lamar Jackson. On the other hand, the other big side of this story is the fact that the DEI style number 8 font is going to be used going forward. This, in my opinion, is a major deal. Dale, we've been knowing about this for a while. Dale Jr. was likely going to secure the rights at this point. I believe last year was reported by Joey Tarantella, and I think Breakheart talked about this as well on his channel. They talked about the fact that it was very likely that they were going to secure the rights to that number 8 DEI style trademark, and they have officially secured it. The 8 is officially free. We saw this a little bit on the Budweiser car that Dale Jr. ran with some of the late models last year. We did see that, and now we're going to be absolutely bringing this back. And I think it's a really, really big deal because you think about the iconic 8 style that Dale Jr. ran in the 90s and the 2000s. It still is one of the most iconic numbers and one of the most iconic brands out there as well. And it's one of the most important brands to NASCAR too. And I think as much as we don't really care for the guy in the car, and we'd love to see a guy like Dale Jr. get behind the wheel of the number 8 in the future, and they could have changed it up for this year if Jr. ever decided to race in Xfinity again, I still think it's a big key deal regardless of who is in that car. And I think this is a major, major win for the sport as a whole for Dale Jr. because now he's going to be able to use the DEI style font going forward, the Dale Earnhardt Incorporated font that his family made very, very important. And the number is so important to the family as well. We all know the story, right? Back in 2007, Dale Earnhardt Jr. was trying to get that font and get it secured over to drive for Hendrick Motorsports. I think he wanted the number 8 over Hendrick Motorsports originally. Teresa did not want to give up control. We know that Dale Earnhardt Jr. wanted to have control of DEI, and Teresa would not give up control of the organization. So Jr. left the team at the end of 2007 because of family battle, and she had control of it for a very long time. Until the end of last year, in the middle of last year. And then we started seeing the Junior was filing for the trademark after she gave up the rights on that. She still secures the number 1 rights right now for that trademark. She still has a really big vendetta against Ty Norris currently at the moment. But it seems like there might have been an olive branch that was sent between her and Dale Jr. very recently to try to kind of repair a little bit of the family stuff that happened. Because what happened in 2007 was still a very, very big deal. Because everyone thinks of number 8, they associate with Dale Jr. They don't associate with Lamar Jackson. They associate with Dale Jr. And this number is so important, not just for Dale Jr., but the fan base itself as well. It's like thinking about Jeff Gordon in the number 24, the iconic branding there, or William Byron nowadays with 24, or Jimmy Johnson with the 48 brand that Hendrick Motorsports used for many years. Or now Kyle Larson with the iconic number 5 car that he uses. It's a little bit different than the one that Terry Labonte had for a long time and other drivers like Kyle Busch had for a long time. It's something that's very important for the sport. Numbers are so important in NASCAR compared to NFL and other things like IndyCar and F1. Many people don't associate Formula 1 with numbers, but NASCAR does. We look at stats. We look at other things like that. And I think that this is still a major, major deal because you think about them securing this font. It's a big deal for Junior, and I think it's exciting to see that Dale Jr. and the DEI, and not DEI, but Junior Motorsports team are going to be using the style font going forward. I think it's huge. I hope we get a Budweiser scheme down the road because I know Budweiser has been interested in doing some stuff with Dale Jr. very, very recently. I think this is a really, really big win for Dale Jr., and I think it's good to see that this style font is going to be coming back in 2025, and they'll be using it going forward for the foreseeable future. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go some more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about Dale Jr. using the DEI style font going forward? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about a lack of respect in the Xfinity series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's any major news that does break later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. If not, the next time you're going to see me is tomorrow, where I'll be doing the race picks for the truck race, and I'll be doing the entries for the Food City 500 at Bristol. Then on Wednesday, we're going to have a NASCAR news video more than likely, and we're going to have Xfinity Series race picks for Bristol. And then on Thursday, we are going to have Cup race picks for this Food City 500 and the paint scheme video more than likely as well. And then Friday, we should have a NASCAR news video and the Truck Series race video, and maybe reactions to Xfinity Series qualifying if that happens. And then, of course, on Saturday and Sunday, we'll have reactions to Xfinity qualifying, Xfinity race on Saturday, and the Cup race on Sunday. We got content coming out, people like Haley Ding, Shane Van Gisbergen, Cards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Cleese McFarland, Frankie Muniz, Matt DiBenedetto, Bubba Wallace, Connor Zillich, Junior Motorsports, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, and other stories like M&M's and FedEx and all the good stuff we'll be talking about on the channel very, very soon. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.